Charlie was, you know, the kind of person who is a very influential figure in so many people's lives, and they may not know it. I've taken a lot of time to think about how influential he's been, and I probably haven't fully appreciated it, because here's a guy who took a risk. It wasn't a huge risk. I was a graduate student, so I wasn't a, you know, a complete, you know, a complete risk. And he essentially threw me into the mix, participating in workshops, drafting memos, looking up new information. And that's 5 years after the Belmont report was written. And we're going to meetings and talking about implementing Belmont and implementing privacy protections, and talk about the imposter syndrome. I had it in spades. But Charlie, whose own history, as you probably know, is both charming and heartrending and fascinating. He once talked to me about his list of gracious people. Now, Charlie is, you know, has a background in both theological studies and in the seminary. You know, to have met his wife and then chosen Estelle over, you know, it's one of the great love stories of all time, one of the absolute great love stories of all time. So to learn at his side how something as, this almost sounds simplistic, but something as obvious as, you know, there's thinking about ethics and there's doing it. And at OPR, and it was OPRR then, an office that was just this tiny little office, but it was so powerful in its moral stance across the NIH and across the country. And I'm sort of, he's in the office next door. And it's just, he'd come in and we'd chat about things, and Bill Dommel was still there, and Carol Wigglesworth. Boy, there were, and some of the old timers were still, the folks who wrote the regs. I mean, Charlie was the guy who was in the room when it all happened. And one of our great misses was, as he retired, he asked me, which was very gracious of him, to jointly write a grant application to the National Library of Medicine, which was essentially to write a book about the history of OPRR. He said, I can't do it alone, you got to do it with me. He says, well, all these boxes, this is all in the pre-internet, pre-everything, and he had boxes of stuff in his basement. And he said, I need someone to help me go through the boxes, and you're the guy to do it, and we should write this. I said, well, I'll help you as your research. No, we're going to do it together. Wrote the grant application. It got a phenomenal score, and it wasn't funded. And it wasn't funded. A lot of people got quite upset about this. Leroy was especially upset. We never got the full story, but the rumor was that the National Library of Medicine was a little worried that it might be a sort of kiss and tell story about the NIH. So it was never written. Now, he has been trying to make up for that for years by writing chapters in books and textbooks, and he and I are in the middle of a chapter right now. It's overdue, but we're in the middle of a chapter right now. And I think he feels that he has to, I feel he has to do that, and he has to keep living until he has sort of disgorged the living memory that's inside his body. Because in our field, we spend way too much time thinking about the printed document, which is the result of the deliberation. You know, here's the regulation, here's the guideline, here's the whatever. But he was in the room when all the drafts were written and why something got changed. None of that even mattered in terms of his real impact. I mean, most people can write a history of research ethics just talking about his fingerprints on everything. But it was his character, and it was his moral being that just infused everything. You wanted to be like him. You knew you never could. You know, you wanted him to be your mentor if you could. I put him on my PhD committee. It was essential because I was writing about research ethics. But he is a person who he's also the kind of guy that if you haven't spoken to him for a week or a month or a year, you know, when you pick up the phone and it's, hi, how are you doing again? It's not, why didn't you call? And I've been expecting, and what, I mean, he wasn't like the old Jewish grandmother. He was actually your friend. So he started off as an iconic figure. He became a colleague. And I think my most important feeling about him is that he's a close friend. And he's a friend to, I'm sure a lot of people can say that. I'm not in any way unique, but he probably, more than anyone else, helped give me the vision for thinking about how you could apply this theoretical stuff we are learning